the topic I'm working with here is I've titled it "Narrating History to Define the Future in Taiwan," which is slightly different from what's in the program. The Taiwanese state and identity construction, and this is something that I've been working on off and on for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm not really sure where it's going, if anywhere, but it's a topic that interests me a lot, and it's sort of a sideline interest in addition to my interest in science policy, which is my more serious topic. Not that this isn't, but you'll see. So with that, I think I'll say simply that by way of further introduction, that when the Chancellor stood here and said, "To think only in terms of national boundaries is naive," I thought, oh shit. I remember I've got a paper that's all about national boundaries and national identity. But then I started thinking, well, okay, because really what I'm talking about is how have Taiwanese in the past decade, a little more than a decade, been using their connectedness to the world in order to help construct their own new sense of nationalism and identity. So that's the topic. I need to go back a little bit in the past in order to sort of set it up. So the 1945 retrocession, that is return of Taiwan to the government of the Republic of China, a government that had not even existed when Taiwan was lost by Qing China to Japan in 1895, signaled the conclusion of an embarrassing period in China's history, a period during which China had been unable to maintain control over its entire territory. The very word guangfu, that the Nationalist Party, or KMT, that's what I'll call it from now on, commonly used to refer to the event, indicated that something lost had been recovered, and this became even more the case after 1949, when the KMT lost China and retreated to Taiwan. Rather than dwelling on the loss, that sense of loss, and however, the KMT preferred to celebrate the recovery of Taiwan, and the KMT's treatment of Taiwan's past reflected this preference. Its colonial past, from the perspective of the KMT, was not a period to celebrate or dwell upon, but instead a shameful period to be erased and forgotten. This process of erasure was most evident in the cultural reconstruction policies that the KMT undertook in the 1950s and 60s in Taiwan, but it can also be in the various narratives of the past that were presented in KMT-controlled cultural institutions during the long martial rule era, which lasted for 40 years from 1947 to 1987. During the decade following the end of martial rule, numerous efforts were made by scholars, politicians, and victims of the KMT's authoritarian government to capture forgotten aspects of Taiwan's past. As the Taiwan independence movement grew over the course of the 1990s, Taiwan's history became a highly politicized battleground narrative of Taiwan's history, on which the PRC and various political factions in Taiwan all sought to produce evidence to support the differing ideas about what Taiwan's identity is and what its future should be. In other words, since the mid-1990s, in a series of battles over the appropriate way to tell the story of Taiwan's history, we have seen the playing out of contemporary identity politics in a place that, owing to a legacy of Cold War politics, is neither a fully recognized nation nor a part of the People's Republic of China. A particularly good example of this tension can be seen in the basic treatment of various institutions of colonial experience. In the very treatment in these institutions of these experiences, which had under the KMT generally been viewed as a negative feature of a weak past, but which are now celebrated by many Taiwanese nationalists as distinctive features of a rich, multicultural, and uniquely not Chinese past. So in this talk, I want to look specifically at how Taiwan's colonial past has been represented by the ruling parties during the martial rule era and then in the period from 2000 to 2008, and at how those representations have been used to define Taiwan's 21st century identity, the latter ones. A survey of education policy and textbooks from the martial rule era reveals that the KMT shaped much, though not all, of its cultural policy around an attempt, as I said earlier, to erase Taiwan's Japanese past and to replace any sense of Japanese identity among Taiwan's residents with a sense of Chinese identity instead. Japanese language signage was forbidden. Newspapers and other media were presented in Chinese, even if the literate public was not perfectly equipped to read the language, and languages other than Mandarin were banned in schools. If we look at KMT high school history textbooks of the period, we can gain some insight into the standard take on Taiwan's colonial past that the KMT sought to propagate between the 50s and the 90s, during which time all students across Taiwan were taught with the same books in accordance with a carefully constructed curriculum. In general, Taiwan and its history are not well represented in KMT history textbooks of that era, which focuses its narrative instead on Chinese history. Taiwan, in fact, comes up only briefly at 3 points in the narrative: the 17th century, the late 19th century, and 1945 and after. However, each of these periods is treated as a moment of transition, one in which Taiwan is described primarily as a place that was being acted upon by others. At each of these moments, Taiwan was either returned to or taken away from the Chinese, and so we see that even though the KMT did not choose to dwell upon the specific features of its colonial past, the island's colonial past, the fact that it had been colonized remained essential to the narrative of Taiwan's history that the KMT wished the ROC citizens to understand. The very short narratives in these 3 sections focus on the taking of Taiwan by or from the Dutch in the 17th century, the Chinese, and then the Japanese. And while the Dutch and Japanese presence is characterized as imperialistic, the Chinese presence, not surprisingly, is characterized as entirely natural and as having long historical precedent. Moreover, the language used to describe Dutch and Japanese designs on Taiwan is quite negative in tone, whereas the language used to describe Chinese of Taiwan in the late 17th century, for example, at a point at which China or Qing China had not had any control over Taiwan prior to that. But it's still described as a recovery. And then again, in 1945, it's quite positive. The first mention of Taiwan in all of the high school history textbooks from this period appears in a description of the military resistance to conquering Manchu Qing, the great Ming loyalist, the Ming dynasty preceded the Qing, Zhang Changgong, who is celebrated for his removal of the Dutch and subsequent sinification of the island, that is, to make it Chinese. Zhang is described as a filial Ming loyalist and a great warrior who used his military skills to oust the Dutch from what had previously been Chinese territory. So there's that's really a historical description. Following his recovery of Taiwan, he organized a new government, established laws, encouraged agricultural development, made military preparations to reestablish the Ming. So his legacy to Taiwan, according to the narrative, was his fighting spirit and a tradition of Chinese nationalism. Taiwan comes up here primarily because it is a locus of Chinese nationalist and anti-imperialist activity. There is little question that the textbook writers were eager to demonstrate that there was a tradition of such activity in Taiwan. And we'll see this when we look at the next section. So as in the case of the description of Zheng's retreat to Taiwan, the textbook treatment of Taiwan's 1895 transfer to Japanese control and the subsequent period of Japanese colonial rule focuses not on the features of life under the Japanese or the Japanese development of Taiwan, but on the spirit of resistance among the people of Taiwan. As the 1954 middle school history text noted, although the Qing government, which of course itself was not Chinese, right, it was Manchu, and so it could be criticized, was willing to give up Taiwan. The people of Taiwan were not cooperative. They established a Republic of Taiwan and raised an army to resist Taiwan, but they lost. From that time, Taiwan was occupied by the Japanese and only taken back after World War II. That's it. This very short narrative highlights resistance and provides no information whatsoever about Japanese colonial rule. So the high school texts of both 54 and 1967 are a little bit more detailed in their description of the resistance and how it represents an example of Chinese nationalism, but not of the conditions in Taiwan. In these texts, we learn then that Taiwan became a Japanese colony after China was victimized by Japan, but this only strengthened, and this is a quotation, strengthened the traditional nationalistic revolutionary spirit of our Taiwan brothers. Mainlanders, too, we are told, were calling for the return of Taiwan to China, and this was a particular concern for Chiang Kai-shek through the early mid-20th century. Notable in these short sections on Taiwan's transitional moments is the absence of any description of Taiwan or the lives and experiences of its people. To the extent that we learn anything at all about what people in Taiwan were doing under the Japanese, for example, it's not how they were transformed, shaped, or governed by the Japanese, but how they resisted the Japanese rule. This resistance, moreover, is described as entirely consistent with and stemming from the emergent Chinese nationalism of the early 20th century, which is a context that made perhaps some Taiwanese were able to insert themselves into, but not many. In other words, in these narratives, the significant Taiwanese colonial past are, first, that they ended in successful pacification, that they resulted in Taiwan becoming more Chinese. Second, that Taiwanese resisted colonial imperialist activity. And third, that in moments of resistance, we see Taiwan developing an appropriate spirit of Chinese nationalism. Chinese nationalism, I guess I should reinforce that. So these short and very underdeveloped textbook treatments represent the standard narrative that students in the martial rule era learned in school, and that would be all students. This narrative, one that essentially omitted discussion of Taiwan's colonial periods, except insofar as it could be used to demonstrate the existence of Chinese nationalism, was reinforced by other KMT-controlled cultural institutions. So, for example, government-operated museums in Taiwan were built around collections of Chinese materials, many of which, as in the case of the National Palace Museum, which might be the only museum you've ever heard of in Taiwan because it's an amazing Chinese collection, were brought to Taiwan by the KMT. The aspects of Taiwan's past that were celebrated with monuments tended to be aspects that appeared in the narrative discussed above. So, for example, there was a monument of Zhengcheng in Taipei Park, and of course, Zheng sites in Tainan, which is a southern city, were also open to the public. By contrast, and here I'm getting to the more recent, in the post-martial rule era, and particularly during the Chen Shui-bian era, he was president between 2000 and 2008, during which time the executive branch was controlled by the KMT's main opposition party, the Democratic Progressive Party, and one will refer to them, I'll just call them the DPP. Taiwan's colonial past has been uncovered, explored, and celebrated. And this is a phenomenon that has not been exclusively of the DPP. Some KMT politicians, although I won't have to go into this, I think the current president, mind you, have also begun to recognize the importance of remembering all parts of Taiwan's past, even if their political agenda for doing so may not be quite the same as that of DPP politicians. This emphasis on colonial past can be seen in all sorts of venues, including museums, monuments, and other public spaces, as well as in textbooks. And it was the result of a systematic effort on the part of various government-controlled cultural institutions, including the Ministry of Education, between 2000 and 2008. In 2006, so I'm just going to give you a few examples. In 2006, the DPP implemented a new high school history curriculum that introduced an entire term on Taiwan history at the high school level, and this was really a radical change. The semester-long Taiwan history course is the first of 4 terms of history that any high school student must take in Taiwan. It's followed by a single semester of Chinese history and then a full year of world history. There are several notable features of this curriculum. It was the first high school history curriculum to reduce Chinese history to a single semester, to expand Taiwan history to an entire semester, and to begin the history curriculum with Taiwan. And the idea is it's a concentric circles theory of education, that you start with what's closest to you and then you move outwards. The Taiwan semester of this new curriculum is divided into 4 broad periods. The first focuses on Aboriginal cultures of the 17th century, very explicitly defined as a multicultural society. The second examines political, social, and economic development under the Qing, as well as, so that would be from the 17th century on. Okay. As well as Taiwan's external relations during that period. The third describes Taiwan under Japanese imperialism, focusing on politics, economic and infrastructural development, and so on. And then the final portion of the semester focuses on contemporary Taiwan, including segments on martial law, the lifting of martial law, economic, social change, and a globalized Taiwan. So each of these 4 sections of this curriculum is designed to place Taiwan into a broad international context, or at least a context that is not solely Chinese. So part 1 considers how Taiwan was inhabited by Aborigines of Austronesian, not Chinese origin, and there's debate among anthropologists about where these Aborigines came from. The focus on multicultural 17th century aims to show that in addition to Aboriginal groups, Taiwan's population included Dutch and Spaniards, not in large numbers, but some were there, as well as non-Chinese. And there's this, sort of overwhelming emphasis on the Dutch presence, and so on. So we see that it's kind of going as a theme. This new emphasis on Taiwan's colonial past has been explored in the public sphere also by a wide variety of political and private groups, not all of which have been DPP controlled. But I'd like to talk about some exhibits that came out under the auspices of especially the DPP Minister of Education, Wu Zhengsheng, who devoted much of the museum space over which he had any control in 2006, which is a summer I spent looking at things like this, to exhibits on 17th century Taiwan. Now, some of these exhibits focus on the multiculturalism of the 17th century, and in particular the diversity of foreign influences, specifically Dutch and Chinese on Taiwan. I was going to give you some pictures, but I'm not managing to do that. There is little doubt the political aims of these Ministry of Education sponsored exhibit were to identify the Chinese as latecomers to the Taiwan scene and to clarify for exhibit viewers that Taiwan has a rich history of diversity and that China is but one of the places that has influenced Taiwan. And this is really a whole sort of, if you think about the educational pattern that I was describing earlier under the KMT, which really, even after the authoritarian period ended, was continuing through the 90s. That's the kind of thing people were learning. This is really a process of re-education that the DPP was engaged in attempting to do. So to teach people about this. Now, perhaps the best example was this exhibit, Once Upon a Time in Taiwan, and let me just see if I can, that's the exhibit. We have this, what I did was to put together a series of houses. You have a Dutch house, an Aboriginal house, Chinese. It's not a great picture, but you kind of get the idea. And you would walk into these houses and you would get a feeling for, what was it like for a Dutch person living in Taiwan in the 17th century? The 24 Dutch people that lived there. What was it like for, maybe there were 30 something, I don't know. What was it like for the Aborigines? What was it like for the Han Chinese? The exhibit would set up. It was almost as if there was 1/3 Dutch, 1/3 Chinese, and 1/3 Aborigines. So you were left with this impression of a really, really diverse Taiwan. And I think that was a very intentional effort. A different site, there's the Chinese house. I'm going to just quickly. A different site, which is located out in Taipei County, is an old gold mine at Washington. I am going to run over a minute or two. And this has become the old ecological park. It brings tourism into the town and it helps revitalize its economy now that the old gold mine, which became part of the park, other functions. Now, Jinghuasha experienced its heyday under Japanese colonial rule. The Japanese developed it as a company town, but it declined then later on as the gold began to run out. And so one of the things that needed to happen was, in order to keep it was to do something like this, create a museum. Now, one striking thing about the museum exhibit is the glowing portrait of Japanese colonial rule that it conveys. Once the Japanese arrived in Jingwashu, the town began to boom, according to the narrative, and the Japanese provided people with all sorts of modern amenities, such as new hospital, post office, schools, movies, and so on. And this is really a very important part of this narrative. So for them, the Japanese brought modernity, they brought access to the outside world, they brought wealth or comparative wealth, and this made the colonial era a basically positive experience for these people. So it's become a major tourist destination for Taiwanese as well as foreign visitors, and there's really an unabashed celebration of the Japanese colonial era that one encounters in this village full of, as you can maybe sort of see there, beautifully restored Japanese-style buildings. And there's a palpable nostalgia for a vibrant and modern Japanese-led past that must shortly lead visitors to consider the Japanese colonial era in a positive light. So all of these exhibits, and there are many more that I could talk about but won't, seek to rehabilitate Taiwan's colonial past, to make it visible to observers, and to present it as having had merits and as having benefited Taiwan and the Taiwanese. They're also, the other aim of them is to make it clear that the experience of Taiwan is distinct from the experience of China. So I'll flip to my conclusion. So Taiwan's colonial past was not a subject to be discussed much in the martial rule era, but by the first decade of the 20th century, one could find references to it almost anywhere one looked. Bookstores, coffee tables of the Japanese colonial era, and reproductions of Japanese era postcards, and museums were full of exhibits about the Dutch colonial era. Even the very Chinese National Palace Museum, which I mentioned before, exhibits on topics, with titles like Ila, I'll butcher this because I don't speak Portuguese, but Ila, the emergence of Taiwan on the world scene in the 17th century. And the explanation for this shift is especially complicated. Celebration of Taiwan's differences from China and its past engagements with other cultures and civilizations was politically useful for a DPP government that was bent on promoting Taiwanese nationalism and on helping young people to develop a distinctively Taiwanese identity, and in doing all of this, furthering an independence agenda. So history was really being employed with an eye to building an independent and distinctively Taiwanese identity. Now, there's a lot more I could say about how there are debates going on, but I won't through this whole period.